The revelation that Thomas Forrester was biologically the son of Eric Forrester, not Ridge, detonated across the Forrester empire like a bomb. What began as a medical investigation to save Thomas's life turned into a generational earthquake that shook the foundation of everything the family had built: legacy, loyalty, identity, and most of all, control. Now, with Eric confirmed as Thomas's father, the familia and the company faced an even bigger reckoning: inheritance. Buried deep in Eric Forrester's original estate documents, a clause had long been considered symbolic, a relic from a time when names mattered more than shares. The clause designated the eldest biological son of Eric Forrester as the heir presumptive to all creative leadership, executive voting power, and a controlling seat on the board in the event Eric was incapacitated or deceased. For decades, that title had defaulted to Ridge. But Ridge, now proven to be Massimo Marone's son, was never Eric's biological heir. That made Thomas for the first time not just a designer, not just a son in Ridge's shadow, but the Forrester heir. The implications were immediate and massive. The first shockwave hit the Forrester Creations boardroom. Executives and shareholders scrambled to interpret what the clause meant in real time. Thomas, still undergoing cancer treatment but regaining strength, was summoned to a private legal review of Eric's last will and trust. Legal advisors confirmed it. Thomas, as Eric's biological son, superseded Ridge under the original terms. Not only could he now claim controlling interest if Eric passed or became incapacitated, but his current vote on the board pending further review is more influential than anyone had realized. Steffi's reaction was instant and visceral. She had led Forrester Creations through scandal, loss, and cutthroat competition. She had proven herself as a CEO strategist and legacy bearer. But the revelation of Thomas's new status rattled her grip on power. She had spent her entire life being the one who stayed clean, stayed strong, and held the line. Now her brother-in-law had stumbled, collapsed, and nearly burned the family down. In the past was suddenly the firstborn Forrester male. She confronted Thomas directly. "You've barely recovered," she told him. "And now you think you should be running Forrester." Thomas, surprisingly calm, replied, "I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know. But it's not about what we want, it's about what Dad wrote. What Eric decided. He made this company. If this is what he wanted, I'm not going to ignore it just because it makes you uncomfortable." Uncomfortable, Steffi snapped. "You were spiraling out of control a year ago. You lied, manipulated. You lost custody of your own son. And now you want to act like you're entitled to lead. This isn't about DNA, Thomas. It's about trust." Thomas's voice dropped to a quiet edge. "Then trust that I've changed." But the tension didn't stop at sibling rivalry. Ridge, reeling from the truth about his own parentage, found himself pushed out of position not just emotionally, but legally. Thomas, now seen as Eric's direct heir, had a claim that invalidated Ridge's long-standing assumption of succession. Ridge, emotionally gutted and driven by pride, responded by demanding legal action. He filed a petition to freeze Thomas's executive voting rights until the paternity issue was settled by court and all inheritance terms were formally revised. Ridge couldn't bear the idea of being erased from the company he had helped lead for decades. "DNA doesn't erase decades of work," he told the board. "Thomas is sick. He's unstable. You want to give him control of this company because of one clause written in the 80s, but the board wasn't unified. Some of the older members, loyal to Eric's vision, began pushing for the clause to be honored. Others, wary of handing power to Thomas, sought legal ambiguity to stall his ascension. Meanwhile, Eric, too frail to reassert control directly, remained silent, this condition fluctuating daily, his will still legally binding. And that's where Brooke saw her opening. Brooke had always played the long game. She knew the structure of power at Forrester better than anyone. With Ridge wounded and distracted, and Thomas gaining momentum, she saw only one path forward to preserve her family's influence: elevate RJ. RJ Forrester had largely stayed out of company politics, but Brooke changed that quickly. She began pushing for RJ to be fast-tracked into design meetings, executive briefings, and investor presentations. She whispered to Ridge that their son deserved a seat at the table, especially now that Ridge's own position was under attack. RJ is your real legacy, she said to Ridge in a hushed moment. If Thomas gets the company, what do you think he'll do? You've seen what happens when he feels empowered. He'll erase everything you built. But if RJ steps up now, we still have a voice. Brooke wasn't alone. She began courting allies on the board. Older designers loyal to her. Financial backers who feared instability. Slowly, she built a quiet coalition with one clear mission: secure RJ's future and block Thomas. But Hope Logan had a different concern. She had watched her son Douglas get tossed between family factions too many times. Now with Thomas suddenly at the center of a succession war, Hope feared Douglas would be pulled into the spotlight as a pawn once again. She confronted Thomas privately. Whatever's happening with the company, leave Douglas out of it. Thomas looked genuinely hurt. You think I'd use our son as leverage? I know what this kind of power does to people, Hope said. You fought so hard to rebuild trust with Douglas. Don't let this undo everything. I would never, Thomas said. But this is about more than me. If I don't stand up now, everything my grandfather wanted for this company gets rewritten by people who were never even part of his vision. Hope didn't respond immediately. She understood his drive. But she also knew how much was at stake for everyone, especially Douglas, who was old enough now to hear the whispers, to read headlines, to feel the pressure. The internal war at Forrester Creations raged quietly but brutally. Legal teams reviewed trust clauses, contingency plans, and inheritance triggers. Steffi clung to her CEO title, but her authority was no longer unquestioned. Ridge fought to maintain control of a legacy that, by blood, was no longer his. Brooke maneuvered like a chess master, determined to crown RJ before Thomas could claim the throne. And Thomas, once the black sheep, was now both heir and threat. The media got wind of the conflict. Headlines speculated about succession battles, family betrayal, and a company at war with itself. Investors grew nervous. Public perception shifted. Forrester's clean, luxurious image began to crack. One wrong move and decades of prestige could collapse into scandal. Inside the company, alliances shifted by the day. Pam and Charlie whispered loyalties in the hallway. Carter, torn between legal duty and personal loyalty, walked a tightrope. Zende quietly began positioning himself as a stabilizer, hoping to rise if the power vacuum exploded. Even Paris, recently rehired, became a confidant to both Ridge and Thomas, feeding information across lines. In the center of it all was Eric Ford, now silent, confined to a hospital room, but still legally the patriarch. Every faction waited for his next move. Would he rewrite the will? Would he remove the clause? Would he speak publicly and choose a successor? And what if he didn't make it? What if Eric died and the clause did as it was? Then Thomas, for better or worse, will become the most powerful man at Forrester Creations. And everyone else would have to decide whether to fight him or follow him. Will Spencer was a man unraveling. Once poised, confident, and proud heir to the Spencer legacy, he now carried the weight of a mistake so devastating it crushed the very identity he had spent his life building. The revelation that Luna was pregnant and that he might be the father had shattered him. But it wasn't just the pregnancy that haunted Will. It was the betrayal. The betrayal of Elektra. The betrayal of himself. And the chain of pain that rippled outward from one reckless moment. Will had fallen into Luna's orbit during a time when he and Elektra were fragile. A brief separation. A fight that left wounds open. And in that crack of emotional vulnerability, Luna had been there. Beautiful. Complicated. Daring. What should have been a passing indiscretion had turned into a secret, and that secret became a nightmare the day Luna told him she was pregnant. At first, Will tried to be responsible. He tried to believe he could step up, make it work, do the right thing. But everything inside him resisted. His heart wasn't in it. His love was with Elektra. And every time he looked at Luna, All he saw was the damage he had done. Electra knew something was wrong. She had always been able to read Will like a book. And while he tried to hide the truth, the guilt poured out of him in silences, in distance, in a sadness he couldn't shake. When she finally confronted him, the truth came out in pieces, ugly and raw. Will told her about Luna, about the night he wished he could take back, about the pregnancy, about everything. Electra didn't scream. She didn't slap him or throw things. She just stood there, her world falling apart behind her eyes. And then she left. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because Electra still loved him. And part of her, however broken, still believed that love could be enough to hold them together. She planned a night not to forget, but to forgive. She set the table, dimmed the lights, wrote down the things she wanted to say. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if she was strong enough. But she had to try. For Will. For everything they once were. She never got to speak those words. Because as Electra waited for Will that evening, everything spiraled out of control. Will didn't come home. Instead, he sat alone at the cliffs near the Spencer estate, looking out at the black ocean below. The wind was cold. The sky was indifferent. And Will, gripped by shame and despair, felt utterly hollow. He couldn't live with the idea of marrying Luna not because she was unworthy, but because he knew he could never love her. Not the way she needed. Not the way he had once loved Electra. He had ruined everything. And now Luna was carrying a child that had no chance at a happy family. Will's thoughts darkened. His breathing slowed. He stepped closer to the edge. He didn't want to run anymore. And in the shadows behind him, Luna stood watching. She had followed him. Not out of love, but out of desperation. The truth had come out. The paternity test had proved Will wasn't the father. But Luna hadn't accepted it. She couldn't accept it. Her memories of that night were fractured, haunted by flashes, distorted by fear and shame. Will had to be the father. He had to be the answer. Because if he wasn't, then everything she believed collapsed. And now, here he was about to throw himself off a cliff to escape a future with her. The rage boiled over. Luna had taken a gun from her father's collection days earlier hidden, unregistered, loaded. She hadn't planned to use it. But in that moment, all the fear, shame, rejection, and loss fused into one violent instinct. She stepped out of the shadows, gun in hand, pointed straight at Will. "Don't you dare walk away," she screamed, voice shaking with fury and heartbreak. "You don't get to leave me here with this mess. You don't get to die and dump it all on me." Will turned slowly, eyes hollow. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But I can't live a lie, Luna. I can't marry you. I don't even know what's real anymore." Luna's hand trembled. Her finger moved to the trigger. "If you won't be the father, if you won't choose me, then what's the point?" She stepped closer. Will didn't move, but someone else did. Electra. She had gone looking for Will after hours of silence. When he didn't come home, when he didn't answer, something inside her screamed that something was wrong. She drove until she saw his car near the cliffs. And when she got out, she saw Luna. The gun. The look on Will's face. And without thinking, she ran. 1 second. That's all it took. 1 second before Luna's shaking finger pressed the trigger. 1 second before the gun went off. And Electra threw herself in front of Will. The shot rang out like thunder, echoing into the canyon below. Will screamed. Luna dropped the gun. Electra collapsed in Will's arms, blood blooming across her shoulder. Sirens wailed in the distance as Somion had heard the shouting, the gunshot. Everything moved in chaos. Luna stood frozen. Will clutched Electra, sobbing, begging her to stay with him. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to whisper, "I couldn't let you go at the hospital." The wound turned out to be non-fatal but serious. Electra had lost a lot of blood. She needed surgery. Will never left her side. He held her hand through the night, wept when the doctors said she'd be okay. He had been prepared to die hours before. Now he realized the only reason he was alive was because the woman he betrayed had saved him with no hesitation. It broke him in a new way. Luna was arrested. Not because anyone thought she was evil, but because she had become a danger to herself and others. The truth about her psychological collapse came out during questioning. The trauma, the confusion about that night, the real father still unknown, Sheila's involvement still under investigation. Everything she had buried came flooding to the surface. She was transferred to a psychiatric facility pending further evaluation. Will was left with the ruins. He visited Electra daily, but he couldn't look her in the eye without shame. "You almost died for me," he whispered one night. "After everything I did. I don't deserve you." Electra, bandaged, pale, but unbroken, looked up at him. "You're right. You don't. But I still love you." That night, they didn't talk about the future or the past. They just sat together in silence, fingers intertwined, hearts still beating. But outside that hospital room, the world kept spinning. The scandal was all over the news. Luna, Will, the shooting, the pregnancy. The Spencer name dragged into another dark chapter. Bill moved quickly, covering the story, spinning damage control. But even he couldn't contain the fallout. And somewhere in that facility, Luna began to recover. Slowly. She started therapy. She began to speak about that night with clarity. And one day, when she was ready, she whispered something to her doctor, something that suggested there might be another man involved. A face she saw briefly. A voice she heard. Not Will. Not Liam. Someone else. And just like that, the mystery deepened again. Because the story wasn't over. It had just survived the shot.